The judge asked me one question. Mr. England, do you understand that by signing this you are transferring full and irrevocable control of the estate, the business, and all associated holdings to Sydney, England? I said, I do. My lawyer's hand was shaking on the table next to mine. Sydney sat across the room in a black dress that cost more than my first boat, and she was already smiling like the whole thing was over. Her lawyer slid the final page toward her for her signature, glanced down at it one more time to check the numbers, and went the color of drywall. He set his pen down like it had bitten him. That's the moment I want to start with. Not because I'm trying to be dramatic. Believe me, I'm the least dramatic man you'll ever meet. Ask anyone at the boatyard. But because everything before it only makes sense once you've seen where it ends. So hang on to that image. A pale lawyer, a confident daughter-in-law, a signature that was about to blow up everything she thought she'd won. Now let me back up, because you need to understand what I gave up before you understand what I got back. My name is Oscar England. I'm 61 years old, and for almost 40 of those years I've built and restored wooden boats on the water in Traverse City, Michigan. My father taught me the trade in a cinderblock shed with no heat, and I turned it into England Boat Works. A real shop, 22 employees, a waiting list 2 years long for a custom sailboat. It's not a fortune. It's better than a fortune. It's a name people trust. I built it with my wife, Megan. She kept the books, she kept me sane, and for 36 years she kept me honest, which, trust me, was the harder job. We had one son, Justin. Good kid. Better man. He had my hands and her patience, which meant he was twice as good with people as I ever was. 4 years ago, Justin married Sydney. Sydney Bennett, as she was then, showed up at our 4th of July cookout on the arm of my son, laughing at everyone's jokes, complimenting Megan's potato salad, asking me smart questions about hull design like she actually cared about the answer. Megan liked her fine at first. I liked her fine too. It's easy to like someone who's only ever shown you her best angle. It took about a year of marriage for the angle to shift. Sydney didn't like the boatyard. She never said it outright. She was too smart for that, but she said it in 100 small ways. She'd wrinkle her nose at the smell of epoxy on Justin's hands. She'd ask, in front of guests, whether he was still doing the boat thing, like it was a phase he'd grow out of, like his father hadn't built a life and a name and 22 paychecks out of the boat thing. You could be doing so much more, she told him once, right in front of me, like I wasn't standing there holding a coffee mug. You have an MBA, Justin. You're better than sanding hulls. Justin laughed it off. He always laughed things off. That was his gift, and, I'd learn later, his weakness. I told Megan about it that night. In bed, the two of us doing the thing married people do where you replay the day out loud to see if it sounds as bad the second time. She's not wrong that he could do other things, Megan said, but she's wrong about why he doesn't. He doesn't do other things because he loves this. She doesn't understand loving something that doesn't pay you like a hedge fund. I should have listened harder to that sentence. Megan had a way of saying the whole truth in one breath and then moving on to ask if I'd locked the shop. Here's the thing I didn't know yet. Sitting in that bed worrying about my daughter-in-law's attitude towards sawdust. Megan already knew something about the people circling this family. Something she'd been sitting on quietly for a while. She never told me. Whatever she found, she decided to build a case with it instead of raising an alarm. If you've caught on already that Megan left something behind, drop it in the comments because I want to see who figures out what it was before I tell you. And if this kind of slow burn family mess is your thing, go ahead and hit subscribe now, because it gets a lot worse before it gets better. Justin and Sydney's marriage settled into a rhythm over the next couple years. He worked the boatyard with me, learning to run it the way I once learned to run it. Badly, then less badly than well. Sydney worked in marketing for a real estate firm downtown, which I only mention because it matters later. She had a brother, Cody Bennett, a likable, aimless guy who drifted between jobs and always seemed to be one bad month away from a worse one. Cody liked Justin. Justin liked Cody. I liked Cody fine, the way you like a stray dog that keeps showing up at the same time every evening. You feed it, you don't fully trust it, and you don't ask too many questions about where it goes the rest of the day. What I didn't know back then, what I wouldn't learn until much later, is that a man named Martin Sloan had already come sniffing around the boatyard once before. quietly, a full year before Sydney ever walked into our lives. Tall, tanned, the kind of smile that costs a fortune in dental work. He'd approached Megan directly, not me, offering money for our shoreline on behalf of a group of investors interested in waterfront development opportunities. 40 feet of land that England Boatworks had sat on since before I was born. Worth more per square foot as condominiums than it would ever be worth building boats. Megan told him no. Megan didn't just tell him no and forget about it either. That wasn't how she operated. But at the time, all I knew was that Martin Sloane had come and gone, a strange man with an odd offer, and life moved on. It moved on right up until Sydney started asking Justin pointed questions about the business, how the ownership was structured, what would happen to the boatyard if anything ever happened to either of us, whether I'd ever considered selling and enjoying my retirement instead of working myself into the ground for a bunch of strangers' sailboats. I didn't connect the two men, the developer from years back and my daughter-in-law's sudden interest in ownership structure, until it was almost too late. Justin brushed it off, same as always. She's just planning ahead, Dad. That's her job. She thinks in spreadsheets. I wanted to believe that. I did believe it mostly because the alternative was ugly, and I didn't want to look at my son's marriage and see something ugly in it. Then came the storm. It was the second week of August. A Thursday, hot and still in the morning, with a line of dark clouds sitting low on the horizon that anybody who's spent 40 years on this water would have read as trouble. I saw it. I told Justin not to take the Whitcomb boat out. A 42-foot sailboat we just finished restoring for a client needed a final shakedown run before delivery. It's a quick test, Dad, in and back before lunch. Wait till tomorrow, that sky doesn't like us. He laughed, that same easy laugh, and said Sydney had already told him to go, that she wanted him to stop asking permission for everything, and just handle things the way a real owner would. I remember that phrasing because it stuck in my throat wrong at the time and I couldn't say why. He went out alone. The storm came in faster and meaner than the forecast said it would. By the time the Coast Guard found the Whitcomb, it was half sunk 2 miles off the point. Mast snapped. Safety harness clipped to a line that had torn clean through at the stitching. Stitching that should never have failed. Not on gear I inspected myself every season. They found Justin 4 hours later. I'm not going to describe what that phone call sounded like. Some sounds don't belong in a story. I'll just tell you that after it, I sat down on my workshop floor, the same floor my father taught me on, and I didn't get up for a long time. My son was 34 years old. The funeral was the hardest thing either of us had ever sat through. Sydney wore black and cried real tears, and I believed those tears because whatever else was happening underneath, I don't think she wanted Justin dead. I think she wanted something else, and something else got him killed on the way there. Megan didn't cry at the funeral. She stood very still through the whole service, her hand in mine, and she didn't say much for days afterward. I told myself it was grief working through her the way it works through everyone. Slow, then all at once. 9 days after we buried our son, Megan came into the workshop while I was pretending to sand a piece of trim I didn't need to sand, and handed me a small metal box. I need you to keep this somewhere safe, she said. Not the house safe. Somewhere else. And Oscar, don't open it unless you really have to. You'll know when that is. I asked her what was in it. She just shook her head and said, "Let's talk about it tomorrow. I need to sleep first. I haven't slept right in 9 days. There wasn't a tomorrow." Megan died in her sleep. 2 nights later. The doctors called it a cardiac event brought on by acute grief. The kind of thing that sounds like an old wives' tale until it happens to someone you love, and then it's just a fact you have to carry. She had buried her son 9 days earlier, and her heart simply couldn't carry the weight of it any further. I've heard people say grief doesn't kill anyone. I used to believe that too. I don't anymore. I buried my wife 11 days after I buried my son. I don't have the words for what that month did to me, so I'm not going to try to manufacture any. I'll just tell you that the box she'd handed me in the workshop sat untouched in my truck's glove compartment for the next several weeks, because I genuinely did not have it in me to open it, and some small, stubborn part of me was still waiting for the tomorrow she'd promised to explain it herself. The reading of the will was 3 weeks after Megan's funeral, in Mr. Whitman's office downtown. Mr. Whitman had been our family lawyer for 20 years, a careful, dry man who drafted Megan's and my estate documents personally and knew every clause by heart. Under the will as it stood, the estate passed jointly to me and to Sydney, as Justin's surviving spouse, with the boatyard's ownership structure to be reviewed by the family. It was a fair document, generous to Sydney, appropriate for a grieving widow. She didn't want fair. "I want the estate," she said, sitting across the conference table with her hands folded like she was closing a real estate deal, instead of dividing up her dead husband's inheritance. "The business, the house, everything. I think, given what I've been through, that's the least this family owes me." Mr. Whitman actually laughed, then caught himself. "Sydney, that's not remotely how this works. The will specifies. I know what the will specifies. I'm asking Oscar to do the right thing and not drag this out in court, where it'll get ugly for everyone, including him." There it was, a threat, wearing a nice dress. Mr. Whitman turned to me afterward, once she'd left, and told me flatly that I had every legal right to fight this, that a judge would very likely side with a fair split, that I should absolutely not simply hand a grieving, possibly grasping, 32-year-old woman full control of a business I'd spent my whole life building. I told him I wanted to think about it. That night I went home to the house Megan and I had shared for 3 decades, empty now in a way I still hadn't found the bottom of. And I went out to the truck and finally took the metal box out of the glove compartment. Taped to the lid was a sticky note in Megan's handwriting, the same one she must have written the night she gave it to me. "Only if it really matters. You'll know." I sat at the kitchen table for a long time before I opened it. When we left off, I was sitting in my kitchen with the small metal box Megan had handed me in the workshop just weeks earlier, days before she died, with a note that said I'd know when it mattered. I sat down at the table and opened it. Inside was a stack of papers, a flash drive, and a handwritten letter in Megan's neat, slanted handwriting. I want to read you a piece of what it said, because I've never forgotten the exact words. "Oscar, if you're reading this, something has finally gone wrong enough that you went looking. I hope I'm wrong about all of it. But 2 years ago, before Justin even met Sydney, a man named Martin Sloan came to me directly, not you, offering money for our shoreline. I said no. He didn't take no well. I did some digging on him afterward, because that's what I do, and what I've found isn't something you say out loud without proof. So I got proof. Whatever happens, don't let anyone rush you into signing anything. Slow is safe. You taught me that in the workshop, remember? Never rush the work that matters." I sat in that kitchen and cried for the first time since the funeral. Not for Justin this time, but for my wife, who had apparently been quietly guarding this family from a threat none of us even knew we had, for 2 years, without saying a word. The papers in the box were financial records. Bank statements, a copy of a lawsuit Martin Sloan had settled quietly years earlier, in another state involving falsified investment documents, and notes in Megan's handwriting connecting Martin to at least 2 other small family businesses along the Michigan coastline that had lost their land to buyouts that looked on paper a whole lot like coercion. The flash drive had something even better, a recording. Megan used to record her phone calls for the business, an old habit from an assistant job decades ago, and honestly one of those little quirks I used to tease her about. Turns out that quirk was about to save this entire family. On the drive was a call between her and Martin Sloan, 2 years old, where he offered her, not me, her because he'd correctly guessed she was the harder sell and the real decision-maker, a consulting fee to help him identify which family businesses along the shoreline were financially vulnerable enough to approach. Megan had said no, on tape, clearly, and then kept the tape. She never told me. I used to think that meant she didn't trust me with it. I understand now, she wasn't protecting the secret from me. She was protecting the timing. I called Mr. Whitman first thing the next morning and read him everything. The letter, the recording, the settled lawsuit, Megan's notes connecting Martin to 2 other coastal families. He didn't go quiet because he was confused. He went quiet the way a man goes quiet when several loose threads he's been half-tracking for months suddenly tie into one knot. "Oscar, I need you to listen to me carefully," he said, once he'd heard all of it. "Don't tell Sydney any of this. Don't tell anyone, and don't fight her for the estate." I told him that made no sense. She wanted everything. Why would I hand it to her? Because a fair split fight in probate court is a private family dispute, he said. It gets argued behind closed doors. It gets settled quietly. And Sydney and Martin walk away with their arrangement intact and no reason to ever expose it. But if you give her everything, no resistance, no fight, she inherits every account, every contract, every liability tied to this estate the moment she signs, including whatever Martin has already moved through it that she doesn't fully understand. She's not just asking for the business, Oscar. She's asking to legally attach her name to a paper trail she hasn't finished reading herself. Megan clearly understood that. That's exactly why she built the case the way she did. Evidence that only does its job the moment ownership actually changes hands. I understood the shape of it now, even if the details were still coming into focus. Megan had left me a trap disguised as surrender. Over the next month, I did some quiet digging of my own. The kind an old man with a lot of free time and a lot of motivation can do without anyone noticing. I started paying closer attention to Cody Bennett. Cody had been around the boatyard more than usual since Justin's death, offering to help with the books for Sydney, which struck me as odd because Cody had never shown the faintest interest in bookkeeping in his life. What made it possible at all was Adam Cortez, our part-time office clerk. A good kid, 23, who handled filing and scheduling 3 afternoons a week and had exactly zero reason to think anything was wrong. Sydney had told him Cody was helping the family sort through paperwork after everything that happened, and asked him to give Cody access to the file room after hours so he wouldn't be underfoot during the day. Adam, who'd never once had a reason to doubt anyone with the last name England attached to them by marriage, handed over a spare key without a second thought. I asked Mike Higgins, my longtime foreman, and the closest thing I have to a brother, to keep an eye on things without making it obvious. Mike's been with me 28 years. He doesn't miss much. Cody's been coming in after hours, Mike told me one evening, leaning against the workbench with his arms crossed. Adam let him into the file room, said Sydney cleared it. I checked the invoice drawer he was supposedly organizing. Nothing's organized. Something's being moved, Oscar. I just don't know what. A week later, I found out. I was reviewing the shop's insurance file. Routine. Nothing suspicious about it. And noticed the safety harness on the Whitcomb the boat Justin died on had been serviced and recertified 3 weeks before his final trip. I hadn't done that inspection. I always did that inspection. Every single boat. Every single season. 22 years running. The signature on the service log wasn't mine. It was close. Close enough that if you weren't the man whose signature it was forging, you might not catch it. Close enough that whoever wrote it had clearly practiced from old paperwork they'd had plenty of quiet, unsupervised time alone with. I sat with that piece of paper for a long time. Somebody had signed my name to certify a piece of safety equipment that killed my son. That's not a fact you get to feel calmly about, no matter how many years you've had to practice staying calm. I brought it to Mr. Whitman. He brought in a document examiner, quietly, without telling Sydney's side anything. The forgery was confirmed. Now the question was who? Cody Bennett's fingerprints, literal ones not metaphorical, turned out to be on that logbook, according to the private investigator Mr. Whitman hired, lifted off a page he clearly hadn't expected anyone to dust. Adam confirmed the rest without even knowing what he was confirming. He remembered exactly which evenings he'd let Cody into the file room, because he'd logged it in the sign-in sheet like he was supposed to. Good kid. Followed the rules right up until the rules got used against him. And Cody, it turned out, owed a significant amount of money to a man matching Martin Sloane's description, money he'd borrowed for a business venture that never got off the ground. But that's not the piece that turned my stomach. Once Martin Sloane's name was confirmed as a real suspect, not just a stranger from an old sales pitch, but a man with an actual financial interest in our land, the investigator did the thing any competent investigator does with a property dispute. He pulled a full title history on the shoreline parcel itself, straight from the county recorder's office. Any lien, lease, or option agreement ever filed against that land would show up there, whether the people who filed it wanted it found or not. That's where he found it. A signed option agreement, recorded quietly at the time it was signed under a routine filing number nobody would ever think to search, unless they already knew Martin Sloane's name. Sydney's signature, notarized by a public notary, 2 towns over, dated 6 weeks before Justin's final trip on the Whitcomb. It gave Sloane Coastal Development the exclusive right to purchase our shoreline the moment Sydney held full, Unencumbered ownership of it. No other family members, no shared title, no strings. Full ownership. Her name, and only her name, on the deed. 6 weeks before my son died, my daughter-in-law had already signed a contract that only paid out if she owned everything. Not half. Not a fair split. Everything. She just needed the world to arrange itself so that words stopped being a hypothetical. That's the piece that actually implicates her. Not the vague suspicion of a brother pulling favors, but her own signature on a contract that gives her a documented financial motive to want sole, total ownership. Dated weeks before the accident that would have made that ownership possible. It doesn't prove she knew about the harness. It proves she'd already built the doorway that harness was meant to open. I asked Mike to invite Cody over for coffee at the shop. Casual, no pressure. I sat down across from him myself. Cody, I need you to tell me the truth about something, and I need you to understand that whatever you tell me stays between us until I decide what to do with it. His hands were shaking around his coffee cup. Tell me about Martin Sloan. The color drained out of his face like someone had pulled a plug. How do you know that name? Answer the question, Cody. He told me. Martin had loaned him money 2 years earlier, real money, enough to start a landscaping business that folded within 6 months. And when Cody couldn't pay it back, the interest ballooned past anything reasonable. Martin offered him a way out. Small favors. Information about the boatyard schedule. And then once Sydney vouched for him with Adam and got him a key to the file room, access to the actual paperwork. Sydney told Adam I needed to help sort things out for her, Cody said, staring at the table. It wasn't even hard. Adam's a good kid. He just trusted her because she's family. I'd go in after he left for the night, and Martin would tell me exactly which page he needed and what to write. I've watched your signature on 100 invoices over the years, Oscar. It wasn't hard to copy. I'm not proud of that. I'm not proud of any of it. He told me it was just insurance paperwork. Nothing dangerous. He said the real harness was fine, that it was just about the certification date on paper, so the sale of the boat could go through faster for a client he was working with. I swear to you, Oscar, I didn't know that harness was actually compromised. I didn't know anyone would get hurt. I believed him, mostly. And I hated that I believed him, because believing him meant somebody else had made that decision. The decision that mattered, with my son's life in their hands, and didn't even bother to tell the man they used as their tool. Does Sydney know? I asked. Cody wouldn't answer that one directly, which told me most of what I needed to know. I want to pause here and say something plain, because I think it matters. I don't know, even now, exactly how much Sydney orchestrated and how much she simply allowed to happen around her without asking too many questions. There's a kind of guilt in not asking questions you're afraid of the answers to. I understand that guilt better than most people because I lived next to it in my own house for 2 years and told myself it was nothing. But knowing and allowing aren't innocence, not when a life is the cost of not asking. If you're still with me, drop a comment telling me, do you think Sydney knew about the harness? Or do you think she was only ever after the money? I've got strong feelings about it myself, and I'll tell you where I landed by the end of this story. 2 nights after my conversation with Cody, someone broke into the boatyard office. Nothing was taken, the safe was untouched, the computers were untouched, but every physical copy of the harness service records had been pulled from the filing cabinet and was gone. Whoever did it wanted to erase the paper trail before I could act on it. Good thing I'd already scanned every page and mailed the originals to Mr. Whitman's office a day earlier. Megan taught me that too, in a roundabout way. Slow is safe. Never rush the work that matters. Keep a copy of everything that matters, someplace safer than where you keep it. The final hearing was set for 6 weeks later. Sydney's lawyer contacted Mr. Whitman demanding I finalize the transfer immediately, framing my hesitation as cruel and unnecessary delay against a grieving widow. I told Mr. Whitman I was ready to sign. He nodded slowly. This careful, dry man who had never once raised his voice at me in 20 years. Then here's what we do. We don't show our hand early. I'll prepare everything. Sydney's signed option agreement with Sloan Coastal Development, the forensic examiner's report on the forgery, Cody's statement, Adam's sign-in records, Megan's letter and the recording, and file it all with the court under seal. It stays sealed until the moment the transfer is finalized, not a minute before. The second Sydney's signature goes on that paperwork, It unlocks automatically as part of the closing disclosure. That option agreement only pays out if she owns everything, unencumbered, in her name alone. So let her get exactly what she asked for. The moment she does, her own contract becomes Exhibit A. And if something goes wrong, if the seal doesn't hold, or she finds out early, then she walks away, and we're left fighting this out in probate court for the next 2 years, while Martin Sloan has all the time in the world to cover his tracks. That's the risk. But Megan didn't build this case for us to sit on it, Oscar. She built it so it would go off exactly once, at exactly the right moment. I intend to honor that. I told him I trusted my wife more than I trusted my own fear. Then, let's finish what Megan started. The morning of the final hearing, I put on the same gray suit I wore to Justin's funeral. Seemed fitting, somehow. I drove to the courthouse alone, the way I'd driven to most important things in my life since Megan passed, and I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before going in, just breathing. I kept thinking about the workshop, about Megan's voice on that recording, calm and unbothered, telling a con man no. I kept thinking, she already won this fight 2 years before I even knew we were in it. All I had to do was not get in the way. Inside, Sydney was already seated with her lawyer, a sharp young attorney named Preston Halloway, who I'd only met twice before, both times across a negotiating table, where he did most of the talking and Sydney did most of the smiling. She looked good, composed, sat in exactly the right places, dressed like a woman who had suffered and endured and deserved whatever came next. Mr. Whitman leaned toward me one last time before the judge called the room to order. Last chance, Oscar. We can still fight this the normal way. No, I said. Let's do it her way. Let's give her everything. He'd already filed the necessary disclosures with the court. The forged signature, the harness records, Megan's documentation on Martin Sloan. All of it. Sealed for review, time to unlock the moment the transfer was finalized rather than before. Because the moment it became public before the signing, Sydney's team would have had grounds to delay, obscure, or walk away entirely and let someone else's name take the fall. Megan's plan, working exactly the way she'd built it, just weeks after she was gone. The judge went through the paperwork line by line. Full transfer of the estate, full transfer of England Boat Works, including all associated accounts, contracts, and outstanding financial instruments tied to the business. Full transfer of the shoreline property. Mr. England, do you understand that by signing this, you are transferring full and irrevocable control of the estate, the business, and all associated holdings to Sydney, England? I do. I signed. Sydney's smile was the widest I'd ever seen it. Then the court clerk handed the final document to Preston Halloway for his client's countersignature. The standard closing acknowledgement listing every account and asset now legally attached to Sydney, England's name. Cross-referenced, as required by Michigan probate procedure against any pending liens, investigations, or claims connected to those accounts. I watched him read it. His eyes moved fast down the first page. Routine, bored, a lawyer skimming boilerplate he'd read 100 times. Then he hit the cross-reference section, and I watched his pace change entirely. Recorded instrument number 4, 471, B. Option agreement, Sydney, England, Sloane Coastal Development, dated 6 weeks prior to incident referenced in case number 220847, subject to pending investigation. Case number 220847, forgery vessel safety certification. M.V. Whitcomb. Fatal incident. Active investigation. Financial records, Sloane Coastal Development to C. Bennett. Cross-referenced case number 220847. I watched his eyes stop about 2/3 of the way down the page, right around that first line. I watched every trace of color leave his face. Your Honor, he said, his voice suddenly careful in a way it hadn't been all morning. I need a brief recess to consult with my client. The judge, understandably confused, asked why. Because, Mr. Whitman said, standing, this document includes, as a matter of required disclosure, a notarized option agreement between Sydney, England, and Sloane Coastal Development, signed 6 weeks prior to Justin England's death, granting that company exclusive purchase rights to the estate's shoreline property contingent on Miss England holding full, unencumbered ownership, which she now does, as of the signature she just provided. This document also references a pending forgery investigation connected to Mr. England's fatal boating incident, and financial records tracing payments from Sloan Coastal Development through Cody Bennett. Under the transfer being requested, Sydney England is now the named party of record on every one of those filings. The room went very quiet. Sydney turned to Preston, her smile completely gone now, replaced by something sharper and more frightened. That contract was private. How does he even have that? It was filed with the county recorder's office the day you signed it, Mr. Whitman said. Private isn't the same as hidden, Miss England. It was simply waiting for the day you finally owned enough to make it matter. Mr. Whitman played the recording next. Megan's voice filled that courtroom, calm and steady. The same voice that used to call me in for dinner from the workshop. The same voice that read Justin bedtime stories, laid out plain as day, refusing Martin Sloane's offer years before any of this began. Then came the rest of what Megan and the investigation had built. The settled lawsuit in another state, the pattern connecting Martin to other coastal families, the payments routed through Cody Bennett, and finally, the forged signature on the Whitcomb's safety harness log. Sydney's face went through about 4 different expressions in the space of a minute. Shock, anger, calculation. And finally, something that almost looked like relief, the look of someone who'd been holding a weight for a long time and had just watched it get set down, whether she wanted it set down or not. I didn't know about the harness, she said quietly, mostly to herself. I swear to God, I didn't know about the harness. I believe that part. I think, in the end, that's the one piece of mercy I can offer her. That whatever she was chasing, she wasn't chasing her husband's death. Martin Sloane was chasing that, alone, because a live Justin England asking careful questions about his wife's new financial habits was a liability, and a grieving widow signing everything over quietly was an opportunity. The investigation that followed took 4 months. I'll give you the short version, because you've earned it after sticking with me this long. Martin Sloane was arrested and charged with fraud, coercion, and manslaughter in connection with the tampered safety equipment. His pattern with other coastal families came out in full during discovery. 3 other small businesses, 2 of which had already sold their land to shell companies, traced back to him. He's currently awaiting trial, and given the evidence, his own lawyer has reportedly told him to prepare for a plea. Cody Bennett cooperated fully once the investigation opened, gave a full statement, returned what money he had left, and is currently serving a reduced sentence for his role in the forgery. Given his cooperation and the fact that he genuinely did not know the harness itself had been compromised, I visited him once. Before his sentencing, he cried through most of it. I told him I forgave the fear, even if I couldn't yet forgive the choice. That's as honest as I could be. Sydney was never charged criminally for Justin's death itself. There was no evidence she knew the harness had been tampered with. But the option agreement was a different story. Prosecutors charged her separately for conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, built directly around that signed contract and the payments traced through Cody. Because the estate transfer had made her legally responsible for every account and filing attached to it the moment she signed the option agreement, the funds Martin had funneled through, and the shoreline itself were all seized or unwound through civil proceedings before her criminal case even went to trial. The business came back to me cleaner than it had been in years, every account audited and verified. The last time I saw Sydney was outside the courthouse months later, waiting for a ride share in the rain without an umbrella. She looked smaller than I remembered. She looked at me and said, "You planned this. From the beginning." "No," I told her. "My wife did. I just had to trust her." She didn't say anything else. She got in the car and left, and that was the end of it. I reopened Milan Boatworks fully that fall. Mike Higgins runs the floor now, same as always, and I spend most of my days doing the parts of the work I love best: the sanding, the joinery, the slow work that matters. We finished the Whitcomb's replacement boat as a gift for the client who lost his original on the house, because some debts aren't about money. I put a small plaque near the front door of the shop, just 2 names and 1 sentence underneath: Megan and Justin England. Some things are worth the slow work. Mrs. Halloran, an old family friend, not related to Sydney's lawyer, just a coincidence of last names life apparently enjoys, Stopped by last month and asked if I was doing all right. Out here running things alone. I told her I wasn't alone. Megan spent years quietly guarding this family from a threat none of us could see, and in her final days, she made sure that guarding didn't die with her. Justin built a marriage on trust and paid the highest price a person can pay for believing in someone. Walt built 28 years of loyalty that never once wavered. I've got more family in this shop than most people find in a lifetime. I learned something out of all this that I want to leave you with. Revenge, real revenge, isn't loud. It doesn't come from a place of hate. Sometimes it looks exactly like patience. Like a woman recording a phone call 2 years before she needs it. Like a husband trusting a note in a metal box more than his own fear. Like giving someone everything they asked for and letting the truth attached to it do the rest of the work. Sydney wanted the estate, the business, everything. So, I gave it to her. And everything came with it. Before you go, if this story hit you somewhere, do me a favor and comment what you'd have done in my position. Would you have fought Sydney in court, or trusted the plan like I did? And if you haven't already, hit subscribe. There's another story dropping soon, and you won't want to miss where it starts.